Say goodbye to the queasiness you might feel when having a difficult conversation. Alice Shikina is here to help us navigate conflicts effectively using her wealth of theater, mediation, and negotiating experience. She also volunteers as a conflict transformation instructor, helping incarcerated individuals with communication skills and with the Department of Police Accountability to foster understanding between civilians and police officers. Currently residing in California, she is also the host of her negotiation podcast. Join me in extending a warm welcome to Alice Shikina.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Toastmasters. How's everyone doing? Are you having a great time? Are you making new friends and reconnecting with old ones? Fantastic, and I'm so happy to see all of you here. Thanks for hanging in. I know it's a long day, but you're here, and I'm going to make it worth your while. And also, I'm so happy to see so many different countries here today. It's a fantastic thing. Give yourselves a hand for showing up. So here in the United States, we have a saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, one of the things that I say is, where there's people, there's conflict. Right? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict and how to resolve it. You might think to yourself, well, Alice, I don't have a lot of conflict in my life. It's okay, because guess what? Someone somewhere one day will drag you into their conflict. And you're going to have to figure out how to get out of it gracefully. How many of you have had those disagreements about whether to leave the toilet seat up or put the toilet seat down? How many? Yes. I personally like to say, please put the seat down and the lid, right? Now, how many of you have also had that conflict sometime, somewhere in your life about doing the dishes? Yeah? So I was in grad school, and I had a summer housemate. And the agreement at that time was that everyone was supposed to do their own dishes, except that he didn't. And so I kept asking him to please do his dishes. And his response to me was, I will, later. And so I got a little frustrated, but I thought, okay, maybe he will. And so since he didn't do his dishes, I personally don't like to cook and eat in a kitchen when there's dirty dishes. So at first, I tried to resolve the conflict by just washing the few dishes that were left by him. Except that over several days, I noticed that I was the only one doing the dishes. Yes, you all know exactly what I was feeling. I was feeling like I was getting taken advantage of. I was feeling irritated and was slowly growing into anger. And so I thought, okay, I tried one conflict resolution strategy. This one was about telling him to do it over and over and over again, and it wasn't working. I tried the next thing that I knew, which is just doing it, but then it didn't seem to signal to him that he better be a better housemate. And so that wasn't working. So then I thought, okay, let me try another one. Because at that time, I did not have a lot of conflict resolution strategies that I have today. So I really wasn't sure what to do about it. So I decided, okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just leave his dishes. And hopefully he will figure out after a couple of days that he needs to be doing his dishes. Well, as you can imagine, the first day went by, nothing happened. Day 2 came, and I walked over to the sink. I looked in the sink. His dishes were still there. Not only that, now there were pots and pans that were dirty on the stove. Day 3 went by. They're still there. Day 4, same story, and day 5 came, and I looked in the sink. Not only was there almost an entire week's worth of dishes, there was mold growing on the dishes. I was so angry. I was like, I cannot believe I'm getting taken advantage of. I've asked this person over and over and over again. And so I felt absolutely angry, embarrassed, humiliated, and just really frustrated. So I know that all of you here can relate to this, right? Because all of us have experienced this at some point in time or other. Now, unfortunately, in that particular scenario, because I didn't know what else to do, I just sucked it up and I did all those dishes. Exactly. Thank you. Right? And I know some people said, well, you should have just taken those dishes and stuck them on his bed. Right? Except that wouldn't actually be resolving the conflict. It would be just escalating the conflict. Right? And so today, I want to give you all the skills so that you can navigate something like that without losing. Because what happened to me at that time is I lost that negotiation. I lost in that conflict. How many of you feel like you end up having a heavier burden because you just take it on? Instead of dealing with it, trying to negotiate it, you're just like, okay, fine, I'm just going to do it because I don't want to go and fight. How many of you in here? Yes. How many of you are tired of being that person? Yes. Absolutely. All right? So we're going to talk a little bit about causes of both workplace conflict and personal conflicts today. So you might have some at home or at work, and I'm going to help you resolve all of them, okay? So how many people at work have ever experienced workplace conflict due to interpersonal issues? How many? Yeah, because like maybe somebody's being rude to you, somebody's saying, insults, what sort of thing, that kind of stuff, right? How about differing communication styles? Yes, especially in a place where you have people from different cultures, different values, and so then they communicate differently, and now you're in a conflict, right? How about conflicting goals? How many people have had those? Conflicting goals, some of you, right? Because maybe your boss wants you to do something and you feel like that should not be that important, right? What about unfair workloads? How many people have had conflict due to unfair workloads? Yes? And then what about built-up hostility? Yes, I can hear. And what about lack of training because somebody has not been trained and they can't do the work that they're supposed to be doing? Yes? So based on your reactions, you can tell that a lot of you have experienced workplace conflict. Right? Here are some stunning statistics. United States companies spend around 2.8 hours every single week dealing with conflict, and that leads to $359 billion of hours paid focusing on the conflict and not on productivity. $359 billion. Think about that. Is a staggering number. That is a loss of productivity because people cannot get along. 60% of employees never receive basic conflict management training in the workplace. That means the majority of people have not learned that at work. How many of you have actually learned it? How many people are in the minority, the 40%? Yeah? Okay, a few of you here, right? And so this is a skill that is not normally taught in the workplace, even though, as we all know, conflict is rampant in the workplace. 1/3 of US workers believe that workplace conflict will increase over the next 12 months. And 85% of employees experience some kind of conflict at work, and 29% of employees nearly constantly experience conflict. Can you imagine going to work day in and day out, fighting with someone at work, or having someone at work treat you malevolently, badly, saying things that you're not happy about? And this is your life. It's 40 hours a week of your life. 49% of workplace conflict happens due to personality clashes and egos. 27% of employees have seen personal attacks arise from conflicts. Yes, it's staggering, right? And that's not all. we also have domestic conflict. Finances is where a lot of people have conflict at home. I'm sure some of you can relate to that, right? Inheritance, and you might ask, well, what do you mean inheritance? Well, if you inherit a property from your parents and you have adult siblings, how many of you have had conflict or know someone who's had conflict about what to do with that inherited home, right? And it can tear families apart. So I'm a mediator, and I recently mediated a case where 6 siblings were very, very close to one another, and their parents had passed away 2 years prior, leaving them the family home. Now, when the parents left them the home, their intention was, this is the home that we all grew up in. This is the home where we want the heart of the family to be. We want you to come here when you need a place to stay. We want you to have dinners here. That was the parents' intention. Do you think that's what happened in the end of it? No, absolutely not. They ended up fighting so badly that it started ripping their relationships apart, which was very, very tragic because they were very close prior to that. So there were 6 siblings. 2 of the 6 did not want to have anything to do with the inheritance, but they didn't want to just walk away. They said, you need to buy us out. And the other 4 were like, what are you talking about? We're not going to pay you money for the inherited home that you don't want to have any part of, right? But one of them said, I don't care how much you give me, just give me something. I want out because I don't want to be responsible for the upkeep of the house. And the other person said, and this is very legit, he said, I have 3 children. I'm trying to put my estate plan together, my will together, and I forgot about the fact that I own 1/6 of this home. I do not want to give my children 1/6 of a home that they have no emotional connection to. So please give me some money that I can pass on to my children. And so he was asking for about $100,000, so you can imagine the other siblings were upset about it. So they fought, they mediated with me, and we got it resolved. But this is something that is real. It's very, very real in today's world. The care of aging parents, how many of us have to deal with this, right? And it's about talking to your siblings. Who is going to pay for what? Where are they going to be? Who is going to be doing most of the heavy lifting, right? This is something that everyone has to go through with their parents. Poor communication skills, this is something I see with marriages. And how many parents in here? Getting kids to listen, right, is always some kind of a conflict. And interesting domestic statistics, 20 to 40% of all divorces are caused by financial conflict. That's a high amount. And money is something that is very, very difficult for couples to talk about without it getting heated. And if you don't know how to have these difficult conversations, you end up not having them. And by not having them, you're going to have a bigger problem. Okay? Roughly 70% of families lose a chunk of wealth due to estate battles, something similar that I talked about earlier. 57% of divorces are caused by poor communication skills. There was a UCLA study that found that children who grew up in homes with high levels of conflict had more physical health problems, emotional health problems, social problems later in life compared to a control group. And as adults, they were more likely to report vascular and immune problems, depression, emotional reactivity, substance dependency, and loneliness. So what your children experience in your homes has a long-lasting effect far into their adulthood. And as many of you know, if you grew up in a home with a lot of conflict, you know that these statistics actually are coming true in your adult life. And so this is why I am so passionate about helping everybody resolve conflict, because there is a real-world price to pay if we just sit in the conflict and we don't actually resolve it. And so it's fantastic that you are all here today, because I know that after this session, and after Toastmasters Convention, you go back to your regular lives, but all of you are going all over the world. And hopefully what you learned today, you will be able to not only utilize in your lives, but that you can teach that to the other people that you know, so that you can help reduce conflict in the world, right? How many of us would like that? Yes? So how many are ready to actually learn how to resolve the conflict? Can I hear? Awesome. All right, so number one important rule, setting the rules of engagement. This is true whether you're doing it at home or at work, okay? So in a professional setting, you want to set up ground rules for having a conversation. So if you need to talk to a colleague, a direct report, a contractor, a vendor, and it's a difficult conversation, when you sit down to have that talk, you want to set up the rules of engagement at that point in time, okay? And you can say to them, hey, we're going to have a conversation, but let's just agree right now that we're not going to interrupt one another, that we're going to keep it conversational so no one is going to take up all the airtime. It's always a good idea to say, why don't we each agree to speak for approximately 5 minutes or less? That way you don't have someone talking for 25 minutes and now most of the meeting is gone, right? So setting those things up. And super critical, you want to listen to the other side before you speak and talk about your perspective, okay? You want to know the whole situation. You might think you know the whole situation because maybe something happened, right? So we're here in this room together, and something happens, and you say, well, Alice was in the room, I was in the room, so I'm going to go and talk to her about what happened. But guess what? We each have our own perspectives of what happened, right? I'm here on stage. My perspective is seeing all of you. Your perspective is seeing me up here. So those things are different. So because of that, don't ever assume that you have 100% of the story. You always want to go into a conversation and you want to invite the other person to share their perspective before you share yours. Even if you're giving feedback about something that you're upset about, it's going to be critical to hear what the other person has to say first, because that will 100% inform the way that you respond to them, because you're going to get new information from them, and then that is going to adjust the way that you give your feedback to them. Ask open-ended questions, all right? You want to ask open-ended questions because you want to learn more from the other side. And what I like to say is, you might have a set of questions that you want to ask someone, but please don't be that person where you just go from question 1 to question 2 to question 3. Your second question should be based on whatever they said. You're listening so deeply, you're going to ask another question that is based on the answer that they just gave you. If you can't do that, it means you're not listening closely enough. Okay? And this one is so important to put a gold star on it. Listen without judgment. Judgment is probably the #1 reason why there's conflict in the world. All right? If you show up and you have judgment in the back of your mind, it's not going to resolve the conflict. So, let me ask a question. How many people have been in a situation where maybe no one has actually said anything directly to you, but you could feel the fact that you are being judged? Yes? Exactly. And it's probably because even if they didn't say anything, it was their body language, facial expression, tone of voice, attitude, choice of words. Yes. Thank you. So for these reasons, if you can feel it, guess what? They can feel it when you are feeling judgmental. Okay? So you might ask, well, Alice, how do I do that? As a mediator, I have to be neutral, right? Because if I'm mediating and I have judgment, someone's going to feel it. So before I go in, I turn off all my judgmental thoughts. I turn them off. I am not thinking any judgmental thoughts about the people in the room. It doesn't matter if they have different values than me. It doesn't matter if they're acting rudely, because I need to make sure I remain neutral. So you can do the same thing. It doesn't matter if you have a direct report who has been acting out, not doing everything. I don't want you to go into that meeting thinking to yourself, this person is so incompetent, I can't stand them, and I'm going to fire them in another couple of weeks. Because if you have that running in the back of your mind, it is going to come across. And then you're going to wonder, why couldn't I resolve that conflict? It's because you didn't listen without judgment. I cannot stress that enough. And then you want to mirror back what it is that you heard. So when they say something, you want to say, let me make sure I understand what you just said. And you want to frame it that way. Because if you say something and I just repeat it, more than likely you're going to say, Alice, why are you parroting me? Or why are you just copying everything I'm saying? I know what I said. But if you frame it by saying, let me make sure I understand what you had to say, now they're going to be listening to make sure you caught everything they said. So you're going to change the dynamics just by starting it with that phrase. This also ensures that there's clear communication going on between you and the other person, because you're clarifying. So for those of you in this room, from now going forward, I do not want you to use the words, I understand, or I heard you. All right? Throw this in the garbage, because it doesn't communicate anything when you say, I understand, or I understand what you're saying. You have to actually say it all back so that they can confirm, yes, you understand me. That's exactly what I said, and that's exactly what I meant. Okay? And that way, that's ensuring clear communication between you and the other person. And this is something that you do when you're having a difficult conversation. It's not something that you do when things are relaxed and you're having dinner and talking about what a wonderful time you're having here at Toastmasters. But it is something that you do if you're having a difficult conversation with someone. And then you want to try to name the emotion that you're sensing from them, right? Are they agitated? Are they disappointed? Are they frustrated? Are they sad? Right? And you're going to say, I'm sensing that you are frustrated with the way that I'm conducting this meeting. I'm sensing that you're disappointed in the services that I've had to offer. The caveat being, don't say mad or angry, because there are other emotions underneath madness and anger, right? So you want to really pinpoint what it is, because no one wants to be in the frame of mind to be called, oh, you're angry, okay? So you want to be very, very specific about what you're talking about. Now, in a personal scenario, same thing. Set up ground rules, all right? But here's the thing. When it's in your home, you don't have to set the rules up right before you have the conversation. Set up the rules when nothing is happening. There's no conflict. As a matter of fact, I challenge all of you here today, when you go home and you're having a nice lunch with your family and talking about what you learned here at Toastmasters, I challenge you to say, let's set up some ground rules for how we will have conversations when it becomes difficult. This goes such a long way. When you have ground rules that everyone has pre-agreed to, more than likely, people follow those rules. Now, you cannot get someone to follow rules that you are setting during the argument. Okay? If you say, hey, don't interrupt me, if you haven't agreed to that, people will be like, I don't care, I'm just going to keep on interrupting you. Okay? So you want to set them beforehand. You want to agree, mutually agree, so that you can move forward after that. Now, here are some sample ground rules. You don't have to make them all up. I brought them here for you today. Right? So not interrupting. Mirror back. Hey, you can say, hey, why don't we make sure that before we respond, we mirror back what it is that we heard, just to make sure that we each heard each other. So it's step one, someone speaks. Step two, the other person says, this is what I heard. The person says, yes, you got it. Then the second person responds. Okay? So normally, people talk, and they respond, and they respond, and they respond. And there's no check-in in the middle to say, let me make sure that I understood what you're trying to say. Okay? So if you take that extra step, you'll have clear communication. It slows down the time that you're having this heated and emotional conversation. And so slowing down the time helps in de-escalation. You don't want it to get escalated because then people can't really have a very clear conversation when things are getting difficult. Agree to not call each other names. This is a really good one, calling for a timeout. If either side is feeling emotional, anyone should be able to say, let's just call a timeout, and you break, you go to the restroom, just take a walk, get a drink of water, and you want to really try to calm down your nervous system. Why is that? Because when anyone is upset, your left brain, which is your logic, reasoning, listening side of your brain, is shut down. I'm going to say that one more time. When you are upset or defensive, the thinking side of your brain is shut down. You might think that you're getting through a conversation, but that is an illusion. You're not. Okay? So you want to make sure that calling for that timeout is put in there before you have the argument, so that when it's starting to get heated, you can say, oh, we need a timeout. Everyone breaks, and you come back in a few minutes, and you restart the conversation from a calmer place. Okay? You can agree also not to raise voices. Again, same thing here. Listen before you speak. If you're upset about something, you can say, you know, I want to talk about this thing that happened yesterday. I was not happy about the way that you said this comment in front of our friends. Can you tell me a little bit about your perspective on that? And I'm going to share how I felt. Get the information first, because then you're going to gain some information so that you can respond appropriately. Again, ask open-ended questions and listen without judgment. Now, we're going to talk about judgment quite a bit here. So be conscientious of judgmental statements. For example, you're wrong. Yeah, a lot of people are like, I've heard that one before, right? So you want to make sure that you're not saying you're wrong. Instead, you want to say something like, that's not my understanding. I want you to think about all the places that you speak and have judgmental comments and thoughts in there, and I want you to try to take them out, right? So that's not my understanding. That's a lie. You're lying. You're a liar. I have a different perspective, right? When I do my mediations, I tell people, you cannot use the words lie, liar, and lying. Instead, you have to say, I have a different perspective, and guess what happens? It keeps the temperature low. No one gets upset because someone else has a different perspective, right? They're only going to get upset if they're being called a liar. You don't know what you're talking about, right? Again, judgment. I'm judging you that you don't know what you're talking about. So instead, we don't seem to have the same understanding of the situation. I want you to notice, these are subtle changes, but I want you to notice how I'm taking the judgment out of all of these comments because they land differently. They impact the other person in a different way than if you were to say something that's judgmental. You're not following our agreement. We are not sticking to our agreement. Now here's a good one. I want to tell you a story about this one. So I recently had a mediation where I was coaching them on how to talk and communication, and I told the couple, you should use the phrase, we're not sticking to our agreement. And the husband said, why should I say we when it's her? Right? He did say that. And I said, it's not about blame. It's not saying that she's the one that's not following versus you. It's that you want her to hear the message. And if you start with the phrase, you are not, now they're defensive, and now they're no longer listening to anything you're saying. And I even asked her, if he says, hey, you're not following our agreement, can you hear it? And she said no, because she was already getting very angry. But if he said, hey, we're not following the rules here, we're not following the agreement, she can hear the message, which is that she is also partial to that. She's also guilty of not following the agreement. It's not about being right. It's about resolving the conflict. It's about getting your message to the other person. If you're speaking and the other person is not hearing you, how effective of a communicator are you actually? It's not about how eloquent can you be. It's about, did your message land? Did they receive the message you're trying to give them? Because if you're super eloquent and you're making people angry, no one is hearing you, right? And then you're not very effective, and you're not going to be an effective leader, and you're not going to be an effective domestic partner. Here's another one. You never do what you promise to do, right? People say that. I would like for you to stick to what you promised to do. The other thing that I want you to notice about a lot of these phrases in conflict resolution is that it is future focused. We're focusing on how can we fix it, not blaming people for not doing things in the past, right? We can talk about the past on and on. I'm sure you have been in conversations where you have been talking for hours and hours about whose fault it was, who didn't do what, and who was supposed to do this, that, and the other, right? And we can go on for days having this conversation, but it doesn't fix anything. If you want to resolve conflicts, you need to be future focused. Okay, so we have different perspectives on what happened in the past. How can we fix it going forward? How can we resolve it? And now you're having a problem-solving discussion, not a blame game. Avoid these other common mistakes. And notice, all of these include judgment. Blaming and accusing. This is your fault, right? Micromanaging and controlling people. I have to check all your work because you don't do it right. How many people have heard that before? Yep. Dismissive or belittling comments. You clearly don't get it, right? Threats or intimidation. If you don't improve, you're going to get fired. Insensitive comments about personal matters, right? You need to prioritize work over your life when you're at work. It's resonating with some of you, isn't it? Stereotyping or sweeping generalizations. Men multitask horribly, right? That is a stereotype. So you want to avoid these. Criticism of work ethic. Your work is subpar. So all of these kinds of comments have judgment. This is why they're causing conflict. All right? So if you're trying to fix something, you don't want to fix it showing up with more judgment. Then, at home, here's some more fun stuff. Blaming and accusing. You never take responsibility for anything. Right? How many of you have either heard that or said that? Right? Personal attacks. You're so selfish. Again, judgment. Criticism of character. You're so racist. Right? We've heard those comments before. Disparaging remarks. You're useless. How many of us have said that to a spouse? You're useless. You don't do anything around here. You just sleep and eat. Invalidating others' feelings. You're overreacting. Or, how about this one? Here's a good one. You're too sensitive. Right? Yeah, we don't like those. Those are them be fighting words, right? Yeah, exactly. Threats or ultimatums. If you don't change, I'm going to get a divorce. Okay? So these are ways that people think they're trying to fix the problem, but actually they have a lot of judgment. And so they're only going to add fuel to the fire. Right? Sweeping generalizations. You always do this. Or maybe you never do this. Right? So here's a question to ask yourself. Do you want to be direct, or do you want the other person to receive your message? So many people tell me, oh, well, I'm just direct. I just tell people what I think, and if they get upset, too bad. But guess what? They don't hear you. You're not being an effective leader. They don't hear you when you're so direct that you're offending people. You also want to ask yourself, do you want to be right, or do you want to resolve the issue? Right? A lot of us get hung up in like wanting to be right. And so we spend a lot of time in the conflict trying to prove that we're right, and let me look on the internet and prove this. Let me go find that information, I'll prove that, right? But let's talk about resolving the issue, not who's right. So I'm going to talk about active listening. So I talked a bit about listening earlier, but there's something that interferes with active listening, and so I want you to be aware of it, because if you're aware of it, then you can fix it. If you're not aware of it, then you're not actively listening, or the other person's not actively listening, and no one knows that communication has stopped. All right? So what does active listening look like? Well, listening with 100% of your undivided attention. So not on your phone, not texting someone. How many people, this happens to me all the time, where you're talking to someone, you're having a full-on conversation, it's only two of you, and you're talking, and all of a sudden, they look at their phone, and they're like, right in the middle of your conversation. And then they put their phone away and they continue listening to you. And all the while, you're talking. Yeah. Well, guess what? They've stopped listening to you for like those 10 seconds, right? So they're not actively listening. You want to be able to repeat back what is said to you. So if you can't repeat back what is said to you, you are not actively listening. Sometimes, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this later, but sometimes in mediation, I can tell that people aren't listening. They look like they're listening, right? They have their eyes on the speaker, they're nodding their head, they're sitting quietly, they're leaning forward, doing all the things that you're taught to do to listen. Except I know they're not, because I can tell that they're upset about what's being said. And so I will say something like this: Jane, can you please let me know what it is that you heard Michael say? And this is the response I get. I'm sorry. I have no idea. I don't remember anything. Literally. Okay? Because people have stopped listening. So you want to be able to repeat back what they said, and you want to listen for what's not being said. What do they actually mean? What are the emotions that they're feeling? Right? You want to really listen very, very deeply. Notice if you're feeling strong emotions, because if you start to feel strong emotions, your active listening is getting diminished. You're not hearing everything that's being said. You also want to notice if the speaker is starting to get agitated, because if they're agitated, they're not going to hear what you're saying when it's your turn to speak. All right? And don't be waiting for your turn to speak. So that means you're just like, okay, go ahead and talk. I'm just going to sit here, and I'm just going to like wait because I have something to say, and so I'm waiting my turn, but I'm not really listening to anything that you're saying. Don't do that, because that's not actively listening, okay? This is your amygdala in your brain, the little red part. It is about the size of an almond. And you're probably wondering, why is Alice bringing this up? It has to do with active listening. So the amygdala is a very small part of your brain, and it gets triggered when you feel strong negative emotions, when you're feeling stressed out, or you're feeling defensive. It gets triggered. And what happens? You go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And when you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, you're not thinking logically. Okay? Normally, this happens when you're, I don't know, getting chased by a bear. And so you either will decide, okay, I'm going to go run away from this bear, or maybe you're stepping out into the curb and you see a car coming and you're about to get hit by a car, so you either run across the street because you know you have a second to run across, or you step back, right? But it immediately gets triggered and it goes into fight, flight, or freeze. However, unfortunately, it also gets triggered when you're in an argument with someone. And in that time, you can no longer listen properly. it shuts down your ability to listen. So just when I was talking about the woman who could not repeat back what was just said in the mediation session, it's because her amygdala was triggered and it shut down her left side of her brain, the thinking side, and she could not process a single word that the person sitting in front of her had just said. And that's what happens. So I need you to be aware of this, because when it's happening to you, I want you to recognize it. And when it's happening to the person you're speaking to, I also want you to recognize it. Because without that recognition, you are all going to be speaking to a wall. How many people want to speak to a wall? Nobody, right? So I want you to be aware of what's happening. So I'm going to give you some nonviolent communication tips that you can use as 4 steps. 4 seemingly simple steps, but you have to practice them, okay? But it will help you from getting the other person triggered. It will help the other person listen to what you're saying, all right? These are the 4 steps. You want to make a neutral statement when you talk about what it is that happened, right? In a neutral way. And then how does it make you feel? It makes you feel uncomfortable, it makes you feel disappointed, right? Talk about how it makes you feel, because we all connect when we're opening our hearts to one another. If you just say, well, I'm mad, you don't really know how I really feel, so you can't really connect. But if I say, well, it makes me feel hurt, now you're going to see me, and you're going to understand me a little bit more deeply. And what is it that I need? Not that I need you to do, but what do I need? Oh, I need confidence in my team. I need safety when I'm speaking to people, that no one is going to ridicule me. What are the things that I need emotionally? And then what is the request? Okay, so these are the 4 steps. I'm going to go over some scenarios so that you can kind of understand how it works. So Mickey is the team lead of her team. Every week during the team meeting, another colleague of hers, Andy, interrupts her if he disagrees with Mickey. This flusters her. She loses her train of thought. She gets frustrated. So after 3 separate instances of this behavior, she decides to talk to Andy about his behavior. However, she's nervous about causing a conflict, and so she's been avoiding this all along. But a friend named Alice encouraged her to resolve the conflict with Andy. So here's how it works. Number 1, making a neutral statement. When you interrupt me in the middle of a meeting and in front of my team, how does it make you feel? It makes me feel unheard and insignificant. And what is her need? I need to feel heard and respected. So then what's the request? Next time, could you let me finish speaking before you challenge my ideas? Do you see how there's no judgment on the other person? You're merely stating a factual scenario and explaining how it affected you, and then making a request. She could have said, hey, I don't like how you interrupt me in the middle of the meetings, so cut it out. And you all laugh because you know that that message is not going to land in a good way, right? And one more. This one's very similar to what I was talking about, dishes. We're kind of coming back to dishes again, right? So, same sort of scenario, dishes aren't being done. So, making a neutral statement. When it's your turn to do the dishes and you leave the dishes in the sink, how does it make me feel? It makes me feel disrespected and frustrated. What is the need? I need to have a clean kitchen when I cook. And then what's the request? Could you make sure the dishes are clean as soon as the meal is over? Now, I know some of you are going to say, hey, but Alice, what about, if they just don't do it, like in your scenario? Yes, that still might happen. So guess what? I have some more slides to show you how to deal with that one, okay? So let's say they don't listen. They made an agreement, they're not listening, okay? So I will say, when we have to have the same conversation about the dishes more than once a month, it makes me feel unheard, unimportant, and frustrated. I need to know that we care about each other and have each other's back. Can we figure out a way so that this works for both of us, and so I don't have to keep having this conversation? Okay? Now, the interesting thing about this is that It doesn't have to be about, hey, you do your dishes and I do my dishes. Today, now that I have conflict resolution skills, the conversation might sound more like this. Hey, I noticed that you don't particularly like doing the dishes. I don't mind doing them, but to make this more equitable, if I do the dishes, what can you do for me? You see how I did that? I want everyone to notice how I did that if you are the person who bears a heavier burden by just giving in. You can always ask to make the deal equitable. I don't want you to go home and ever feel like, oh, I'm always shouldering the heavy burden. I always end up saying yes. Everybody asks me for a favor. I always say yes. No. You can say, great, I'm going to do that, and what can you do for me? And it's not that everything has to be transactional. It just has to be equitable. Okay? So imagine you head into your next difficult conversation. Instead of feeling like you've got butterflies in your stomach, sweaty palms, an elevated heart rate, a dull headache, you feel calm, cool, and collected, confident that you have the skills to handle this, and excited to have a problem-solving discussion. Are you ready for your next conflict? Thank you so much for being here today and participating and engaging with me. Thank you so much. You can use this to download a preview of my next book, which is, actually it's not Passionate Persuasion, it's called Don't Sleep on the Couch, Negotiating with Your Spouse. And also, you can get a copy of today's presentation. I will also be out in the front selling my other book, Negotiating with Your Kids. So thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Alice Shikina. Attendees, do not miss your chance to engage in person with Alice at Meet the Speaker, beginning in a few minutes in the foyer from Platinum Ballroom 1 to 2. Alice is on her way over there now and is looking forward to connecting with you.